Hi, I'm Dr. Will Horton, and today's going to be a really quick little webinar on actor's memory. I'm considered one of the world's leading NLP and hypnosis trainers, and I've also been a stage actor for longer than I've been doing anything since I first got out of the service. And so it's my pleasure today to talk about how to increase your memory. And I've also had the unique pleasure of not just being an actor where I've had to learn, 80 pages of dialogue, but I also had the chance to work with one of the world's leading memory guys back a while ago. So let's just jump in and talk about how to develop an actor's memory. When people watch a play especially, they're always like, how do you remember all those lines? Because it's many, many lines. Whereas there are some things that actors seem to do differently than most people. And it's easy, but it does take a little bit of effort. First of all, what are your beliefs about memory? Is a great memory even possible? Can memory be easily trained? Right? What do you believe about this? What is natural memory? When I say natural memory, what's the natural limits of a memory? And an interesting way to see about your memory is, can you sing along with songs from your youth? Whenever you grew up, 80s, 70s, 90s, whenever it is, when a big hit song comes on from that era, can you sing along? That should let you know that your neurology is intact, right? Your long-term memory. We just have to train it correctly. But you have to realize that beliefs comes first, So what are your current beliefs about your memory? I just asked about some of those things. Do you believe it's easy? Do you believe it's natural? What is your self-talk? Because your beliefs will start talking about your self-talk. Do you constantly walk around going, CRS, can't remember shit, right? Because to change your memory, the first thing you have to do is change your self-talk, right? And because people with good memories tell you they have a good memory, right? But let's first talk about levels of learning. This is important when you're going to learn anything new. First of all, you have unconscious incompetence. You don't know you don't know. It's not in your world. But then you move into the level of conscious incompetence. You know you don't know. Quickest example would be, think about a little kid. They don't know how to drive, even though cars are in their world. Then they start thinking about, probably about 12 years old, 14, they start looking at, they don't know how to drive. And then when you first learn how to do anything, you move into conscious competence. It's a lot of work, right? But if you do it long enough and you train it right, it becomes subconscious competence. In other words, you don't think about it, you just do it. Now, what about actors? Well, they want to get to those lines, so they're not really thinking about those lines most of the time, right? They become natural. They roll off the tongue. And there's a lot of reasons for that we'll get to as we go along, right? But with your levels of learning, you have to realize that it's your adaptability to learning that's so important. Because learning is depending on new ideas. You have to try new things. Because if you always do what you always did, you'll always get what you always got. So you got to try some new ideas, right? So when first people think about memory, they think it just rote. Remember, repeat. Well, that works for some things, but it doesn't work for others. Actually, your memory's better in a global sense, right? So always remember, however, though, that contempt prior to investigation will leave one in eternal ignorance. And people like, that wouldn't work. They don't even know what they're talking about. Anybody that's been exposed to the NLP and hypnosis world knows what I'm talking about, because you'll get somebody that doesn't know anything about hypnosis, but they'll tell you it doesn't work. They're ignorant, and they come across as ignorant because they have contempt before they even look at it, right? Now, what's really important with this is your levels of learning, right? The index of learning. Because there's motivation, there's openness to change, and then there's your intelligence. Right? So you need these things to learn any new material. So how are these things rated? Let's talk about how important they are into learning a new skill. Intelligence can actually get in the way if you have a big, broad knowledge base, sometimes that gets in the way of learning new material. Or if you're very, very, very intelligent and you've never had to work really hard at a new skill, it can get in the way. Intelligence to me is like any physical trait, if you will. When you look at athletes going into the pros, you hear the pro coaches and coach, people that coach these guys talk about actually if they're too skilled, it may hold them back from being the best they can be because they don't have to work that hard. And sometimes really smart people have that problem. I know I was listening supposedly about a Bill Clinton talk one time, and he talked about, he's a bright guy. His IQ's like in the 160s. Bright, he's a super genius. But he talked about one of the reasons he liked law more than, because, he could have went into med, he could have did a lot of things, medicine. But law, your intelligence is motivated by how quick you can think and a lot of factors that he also has. But intelligence is good, but it's not the most important thing to learning a new skill. Motivation is important. Obviously, the higher your motivation, the more likely you're to learn a new skill. And of course, it's pretty easy because the more motivated you are, the more likely you are to take the little steps necessary to learn that new skill. If your motivation is a 5, you're not going to do the homework. You're not going to work on anything, and it's just going to show. If your motivation is a 9 or a 10, boom, you're going to do those extra steps. You're going to try the thing. So that's great. So if you're intelligent and you've got a high motivation, that's good. And I would say these numbers begin to add together, right? But you want to get your score up into the 90s or the high 80s, because the most mitigating factor, the most important factor is your openness to change. How open are you to change? Because if what you're doing is not working, you have to try something else, is what we say in NLP. So if I say, well, rather than do just rote memory, let's try these things, where it takes some of the old things about memory, pegging and some of the stuff, but you try it in a different way and tag it into physical memory. Well, if you're open to change, you'll try it. If not, you won't. One of the memory guys used to talk about how when he took a typing class, when he could type pretty quickly with 2 fingers. A lot of us can't. Right? If you go take a typing class, well, you got to use all your fingers. Well, you actually slow down when you start using all your fingers until you get proficient. And then the skill accelerates, right? But you have to be willing sometimes to step backwards to go forward, and that's about being open to change. I have a big example here in my personal life with physical training. I've always worked out. I've always been athletic. Played high school football, very athletic in the Army, played football, year semi-pro football, boxed in the Army, competitive martial arts, powerlifting, yada, yada, yada. So I always worked out a certain way. Well, suddenly I decided I wanted to change how I looked, for my acting and for some other things. Well, when I started talking to some professionals about, how to change my look, well, I had to change how I worked out. That was hard because I'd always did it this way. Heavy lifting, whatever it was, I had to be open to trying new things, right? So how open are you to change? Because it's your motivation times change where you really get that. If your motivation is a 9 and your ability to accept change is a 9, now you're up there. Now you're up there to do this. Because it has to be the ability to incorporate new ideas and techniques that may not make sense at the time, but they will come into play later on. A lot of times people take an acting class, and they're surprised in a lot of the traditional acting classes, if they're good. There'll be a lot of improvisational things, right? And what's this got to do with a developed character in a play or a movie? Well, it does. It frees up your creativity, to find those sparks of genius on the inside. But you have to be able to incorporate those new ideas, those new techniques that eventually you can take over into your plays or your movies in theater. Or in my case, for the working out, it really did reshape my body, right? And I look much different than I did 2 years ago. And that's great, but I had to accept that and make those changes. So you have to open your mind. You really have to open your mind. So our session this time, this few fast minutes, is I want you to think about for the next few days. What's your motivation to change? What's your motivation to increase your memory? What's your ability to try new ideas when we start doing the pegging and the listing and the body list and the other list that we're going to go through and, beginning to incorporate the physical into it and all this other stuff, right? How much are you willing to do that, right? Now, thanks, and if you stay on track, this will change your life because memory is one of those skills that once you begin to develop it, it begins to, generate into other areas, right? You practice it and you try these things like to learn a few lists and increase your memory, and then we'll work on names and faces, and boom. And then it starts becoming self-generated. It becomes subconsciously competent where you don't have to think about it that much. And your memory really begins to change and grow. You know, I know in my case as an actor, if I don't do something with acting once or twice a year, my ability to memorize lines quickly fades. You know, it's a skill you have to practice. In fact, the memory guy I'm thinking of, he used to say that he had to practice, especially the name recognition, you know, putting names with faces when he was meeting people. That was a skill he had to practice constantly, right? Because it's like staying in shape versus getting in shape. You know, here we're going to get our mind in shape, our memory in shape. But then you have to do those things to stay in shape. Just because you get in shape doesn't mean you'll stay in shape. You have to do, but it's easier to stay in shape than to get in shape. You know, that's what every person that works out will tell you. So I'd like to thank you for just this fun, this first session. Now you can go on and it will be posted. There'll be session 1A, which is opening your mind to change using hypnosis and NLP. And I'll be talking about these things in a hypnotic context. So we'll be reprogramming your mind to open up your subconscious mind to the openness to change and to increase your motivation. So until then, thank you for coming aboard, and I look forward to talking to you soon.